Journey Across Gene's Saga. Book 1. Now, Then, to Come. Part 2. Then. Interlude. There's so much that you don't know. Luckily for you, we carry the burden of omniscience. There's so much that we cannot not know. Oh, how at times we envy you people with your inevitable ignorance of almost everything. By now you are probably discovering that you are part of something much, much larger than you could ever have imagined. To speak metaphorically, you are just one of the many bases that make up a larger strand of DNA. But if you could only see things from our perspective, you'd understand that as far as metaphors go, we have to think much more grandiose. The strand of DNA itself that you are but one small component of is only one strand in a vast interconnected web of DNA strands that combine with other macromolecular components to form a cell. To continue with this metaphor, for the sake of extending this literary device, the isolated cell seen from outside its membrane at a distance looks like the planet Earth in outer space. Earth is a floating spheroid made up of various solids, liquids, and gases, and whatever else falls between. Orbiting the Earth as a satellite is a much different spheroid that lacks a natural atmosphere. Now, let's mess everything up and say that the nucleus in this eukaryotic cell is outside of the cell. So, now we can imagine the much larger Earth cell with a much smaller moon nucleus that is orbiting it. Let's extend our imagination to include the possibility that the moon nucleus is the control center of the Earth cell. Here's where we lose the metaphor and reality kicks in. You don't know it, but there is an actual control center on the moon, on your hold, the very object that guides your nocturnal people in your nighttime activities. Let us help you understand. We'll try to start from the beginning. Well, at least a beginning. Hundreds of years ago, there was the Great Dying. Yes, we know you're familiar with it. You've heard the stories. But what about the stories that you haven't heard? For you, there are the last ones. But if you go around the planet in almost every former grand metropolis, there are other last ones. After the Great Dying, 90% of the human population on Earth was wiped out. The Earth's human inhabitants went from a count of roughly 11 billion people to 10 million people in less than a month's time. And even more people died from untreated injuries and the other usual illnesses that don't just disappear when disaster strikes at a global scale. Starvation and the lack of clean water to drink killed many more weeks after the virus was finished with its murderous rampage. If contaminated water didn't cause even further death, then the cancers from the scorching sun, your nop, killed slowly, painfully. It took decades for people to figure out how to go from solely surviving to actually living. But unlike your ancestors who chose to pursue the complex simplicity of living off the land, not everyone wanted to give up the luxuries that life had to offer them before everything went to crap. Let us rephrase that to make our point more precise. There were some who'd survived the Great Dying by escaping from this planet. You see, the virus that attacked only humans was so good at what it did. Viruses needed a host cell to reproduce, and, like most other species, reproduction is how it perpetuates its existence on this glorious terrestrial spheroid where water meets fire, wind, and earth. Have you ever wondered why we call it Earth? We should call it water, since it is mostly made up of that essential element, but that's another story for another time. Naturally, that particular virus spread from host to host through any means: vapor particles floating through the air, surfaces that one might touch at the airport, etc. What is an airport? That's really inconsequential to the point that I'm trying to make. Just know that people from all around the world could fly in machines to travel from one place to the next over long distances in a relatively short period of time. And at an airport was an excellent place for the virus to then spread itself and reproduce in many places. Well, once the owners of the world, the equivalents of the uphillers from the stories you grew up with, once they got whiff that a virus was coming to kill them, they decided to rule from afar. So, the wealthiest of the wealthy went to the moon. And that's how many people from the profit-hoarding class survived the viral pandemic. They'd been planning for some disaster for more than a century. It started with space tourism for the mega-rich, where famous people, as well as oligarchs and their families from many different megacore towns and cities, would spend a weekend in a space station hotel built just for their kind. That led them to building an entire complex of structures on the moon's surface. Of course, they didn't build it themselves. That's what the automated workers were for. So, when the virus began killing off whole swaths of cities in a matter of days, the ones who could afford to flee took to their shuttles and went to the moon, leaving everyone else here to die. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the rich want to return to claim what they see as their rightful place in this paradise. Insert your people into the story. Why would marauders suddenly begin pillaging entire communes of people and forcing some of them to work in a series of dolomite mines hundreds of kilometers from where their homes and other communities are? And why not just kidnap all of the different encampments at the same time? Why did they wait 2 years to kidnap your people from the time they took Tokver's people? Who's Tokver? Oh, right. Well, we'll tell you about her later. You're not asking the right questions. You should be asking what you and your people are doing mining dolomite. Eventually, you will learn more about your and your family's situation. The people who were identified with similar reproductive organs have been divided into several different groups. We won't go into detail right now, but you need to know that the oldest and youngest ones are tasked with grinding the stone down into a powder. So the question is, what are the coordinators of this operation, just one of many, going to do with dolomite powder? Well, since it's a good source of magnesium oxide, it has many purposes, one of which is its usefulness as an alloying agent, especially when manufacturing lightweight products. I'll leave it at that. I've already overloaded your information processors. So, to make a short story even longer, these uphillers have decided it's time to come back, and they need their slave labor back. But they don't want you people joining forces to fight back. So, they keep a very low profile. And, of course, they have people, like those scorching marauders, who will do their bidding for them for a price. Some people are willing to do terrible things in exchange for currency. In the very, very old times, they were called sellswords, because they exchanged their sword-wielding willingness for something valuable like money or property. Later on, they became known as mercenaries, hired to be snipers or even freedom fighters, depending on one's positionality and their relationship to the organization that hired them. Police officers became peace officers, but they still required a bribe for their services, and how to even count the infinitesimal militias that formed organically and sometimes inorganically to respond to what they saw as a threat, whether it be the government or a transgendered person just trying to use the public bathroom at the mall. The latter did it happily for free, sans currency. Ah, yes. But what is used as currency these days? What does one exchange with people for one's loyalty to them? The answer to that requires much more of our time, and we think it's best if you rest now. We're tired of wearing these heavy wings anyway. Plus, we've got things of our own to worry about. We have an appointment with 2 of your people coming up soon. We don't want to be late for that one. They are in trouble and don't know it. Damn it. Why can't we just be everywhere at once? And when do we ever get to rest? Before we come back to visit you, we'll leave you with this tidbit of advice. Find a way to organize your people, your Atmaneti. Unlike you, most of them are unwilling to interact with others who they consider outsiders, but they need to. It's the only way you'll ever get out of this mess. You can still change your future for the better. We know that for a fact, for we have seen it happen. Through Tyrion, you know that the other prisoners who have been here for a while already been organizing in secrecy with the correspondence chain that they have. You all need to join up with them. Remind your people of the stories that you were taught. Remind them of how the last ones learned to live in community with strangers who were afraid of them and of whom they were afraid as well. But they overcame the fear. They built community. Remind them that community is a verb. It's something that you do, not something that you have. Remind them of that. Now, keep sleeping, my dear Egresh. Forget me, but remember my words. Remember. Thanks for listening to another episode of Fenn Thornbot Reads. If you want a notification for the next episode, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you liked what you listened to today, hit the like button. And if you think somebody else might like it, hit the share button. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time. You can interact with the book online at fennthornbot.fan or just scan the QR code above. And may Hold guide you as naught makes itself scarce.